All right, good evening. Welcome to NCFCA's webinar in partnership with the University of Northwestern. I'm Natalia Rosa, NCFCA's Director of Marketing, and I'm grateful to be your host for this event. Our topic this evening is one that's relevant to the season of uncertainty that we're all experiencing. And if you're here, I know that you're ready to learn more about the college search process, specifically how to navigate the college application journey when questions surrounding the cost of enrollment, online learning, and an uncertain future are sitting at the forefront of all of our minds at this time. So just a couple of brief housekeeping items for this evening before we begin. The presentation that will be starting shortly will be followed by an opportunity for live Q&A, and we do encourage you to participate, to take full advantage of this opportunity that you have. Please submit your questions in the chat box that's available on the screen, and I will field those for Andy following his presentation. A note about the chat box: we do invite you to introduce yourself, let us know from where you're joining, but after that we ask that you reserve the chat box for questions and that you keep your questions professional and relevant to the topics that we'll be discussing during tonight's event. With that, I am excited to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mr. Andy Gammons. He's the Director of Traditional Admissions at the University of Northwestern. He leads a team of admissions professionals that walk alongside students and families as they go through the college search process. So we have an exciting opportunity to get a glimpse of that today. Before joining UNW, Andy worked at the University of Minnesota and Century College. He and his wife Amanda have 6 children from 17 to 7 years old that they homeschool in Grant, Minnesota. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to your presentation.
No problem. It is my pleasure to be with you all. We at University of Northwestern love our partnership with NCFCA. We love having you on campus every summer, and we'll miss that extremely this summer. So we're looking for other opportunities to connect with NCFCA families. So this is an opportunity to do that tonight, and hopefully to serve you as best as we can. One of the things that I'm very interested in is not only helping students understand University of Northwestern and everything that we have to offer, but also helping families understand the college search process. One of the ways that I do that is I wear purple every Wednesday night, and when I go to church, I want folks that I work with, that I fellowship with, to know where I work, primarily so that I can serve them. So I've had lots and lots of conversations about the college search process, about financial aid, about should my son or daughter go here, should they go there, what's this whole FAFSA thing, all of those types of conversations in the narthex of our church as we're waiting for choir and to pick up our kids and things like that. So that's my hope tonight, is to come alongside of you and serve you in any way that I can. So I have some content that I've prepared, really just some things to think about as you're entering the college search process, and then really a bit of a to-do, and then hopefully some thoughts that I can leave with you about all of this. I am at my 8th institution, either having attended or worked at. So I've worked at a community college, attended a regional institution for my graduate work. I did my undergraduate work at a Christian college, and I've worked at a Catholic institution. I was at a Big Ten institution last, and now I'm at University of Northwestern, which is a Christian college. So I've been around a little bit, and hopefully have some of that experience to bring tonight and to our conversation. So with that said, again, it is really a pleasure for me to be here. Let's jump into our content. So the college search process, a view from the inside. Our agenda is fairly simple. I'm going to talk about the types of higher education institutions very briefly, and then I'm going to spend some time talking about the benefits of a Christian higher education. Then I'm going to give you, like I said, a to-do list, the college search process by high school year. So if you have a freshman or sophomore, junior or senior, some things for you to be doing now or as we enter into this next coming school year, and then we'll spend the vast majority of our time on questions and answers, and I look forward to that. So types of higher education institutions. There are over 4,300 higher education institutions in the country. And I mentioned in my brief introduction some of those. I'm not going to talk in depth on any of these, but just so you know, I believe in higher education. Past 2020, 90% of jobs will require some form of higher education. All jobs. And that is, it may be vocational education, it may be a 4-year degree, it may be graduate work, a professional degree, but it's going to, for most employment for our sons and daughters, take some sort of higher education institution. So let me just briefly explain each of these. Community and technical colleges usually are 2-year institutions, and they're what are called open enrollment institutions. In other words, at a community and technical college, the only requirement is a high school diploma or a GED to attend one of those institutions. They usually focus on either a technical or vocational career or transfer to a 4-year institution. So you might hear somebody say, I'm going to go to a community college and do my generals. That's what they're talking about, those first 2 years and then transfer. One of the main benefits of this is either that focus on the career, or it's to save money as somebody goes on to transfer. There are regional state universities. These would be places like Minnesota State University, Mankato, or University of Wisconsin, River Falls. These are smaller state-funded institutions. Usually these are less competitive admissions. So most of the time, for instance, in Minnesota, if you have a 21 on your ACT, you're guaranteed admission to these regional state universities. And then there are state flagship universities, also state-funded, and usually more competitive admission to these universities. I'll keep using Minnesota as a example. You'll have to translate to Texas, but this would be UT Austin, right? The state flagship universities, this is the University of Minnesota. State flagship universities are usually the best football team in your state, for instance, but they are research-driven universities. Usually, most of the classes at these universities are significantly larger, especially for freshmen and sophomores, large class size, and often taught by teaching assistants, but the professors are mainly focused on research. So even if they're a sociology professor, the main goal is research. If it's a chemistry professor, the main goal is research, creating new knowledge. So these are an important group of universities. Private liberal arts colleges or universities. I distinguish these from Christian liberal arts colleges and universities. This would be in Minnesota. An example of this would be University of St. Thomas. It's Catholic, but maybe Catholic in name alone. Really, they are very few religious requirements. These are often, they were religiously affiliated at one time, and now they aren't anymore. They wouldn't even purport to be religiously affiliated. The benefit of these, oftentimes the admission at these institutions are often more competitive, depending, there's a large spectrum of competitive admission to non-competitive admission in this range as well. But most of the time, the private liberal arts colleges and Christian liberal arts colleges and universities have a larger sticker price. And I'll talk about sticker price and actual cost throughout our presentation a little bit tonight. So the sticker price, just like a car, it might say it's $45,000 for tuition. Most students at the institution will not pay that much because of discounting and scholarships, grants, other types of financial aid that most private liberal arts colleges and Christian colleges around price are trying to get the price down to what the state flagship university is going to cost. So that's an important piece. The regional university is less expensive than the state flagship university. And then the private liberal arts colleges and the Christian liberal arts colleges are usually the most expensive, but with financial aid, they're trying to get their price down, usually to what it would cost for a student to attend the state flagship university in their state. Benefits of the private liberal arts college, almost always folks will talk about class size and relationship with a faculty member and relationships in the community. So community you'll hear over and over again at a private liberal arts college. So those relationships that a student is building at a private liberal arts college are really important. And then it's going to be very similar, and I'll talk more about Christian higher education in just a little bit. But so that you know, these would be arranged in price from lowest to relatively highest. Again, like I said, state flagship university, private liberal arts college, and Christian liberal arts college will all be around the same price range for the most part. We can talk more about that if you have questions. So there are benefits to each of these, and there are people who love Jesus and who want the very best for their children who choose any one of these 5 options and all the time. So, but I do want to talk about, in my mind, the benefit of a Christian higher education. When I was at the University of Minnesota, it was a wonderful place to work, and students were receiving an education that was top-notch, very good, and from faculty that were doing amazing things in their field, and students were doing really great things. But as I was there, my wife and I kept having conversations about, is this the kind of place that we would want to send our kids? And I'll tell you just a little bit more about that as I talk about the benefits of a Christian education. And interestingly enough, while I was at the University of Minnesota, this job came open at University of Northwestern St. Paul. And I jumped at it because I thought, if that's an opportunity, if God is going to use me working at University of Northwestern to help provide a Christian higher education for my kids, I want to do that. Because I believe in it so much. My wife and I met at a Christian liberal arts institution, and I was deeply impacted from my time at that institution. I went to Taylor University in Indiana, and I'm deeply impacted by my time there for lots of different reasons, primarily from the relationships that I developed there and how my faith grew. So let's talk about these 4 benefits of a Christian education. The first one I think is really important, that the affirmation of the culture and faith that you've been teaching. So for 18 years, we've been working with these young people to show them who Jesus Christ is and tell them about what the Bible says and about what it means to be a Christian in this world. And to send that student, I was talking during the second service of our church. I was sitting out in the lobby with some dads, and one of the dads said, I just am not sure that I want to spend $40,000 to send my daughter to a place that one of their main goals is to tear down all that I've been trying to build for 18 years. And I thought, wow, that is a statement about exactly what I think many institutions are doing. One of the things that I said about the University of Minnesota while I was there was the people who I met, the faculty members primarily who I met, were by far some of the smartest people I'd ever met and some of the most attractive people that I ever met. Not physically, but just very winsome in how they presented their worldview. I thought, if I'm 18 years old, this is a challenge for me. It was a challenge for me to live as a Christian in that environment. Not impossible, but certainly a challenge. So the culture that affirms the things that we've been teaching is really an important piece. The integration of faith and learning. So at a Christian college or university, the goal is not to pray before class and then present the same information that you would receive if you were attending any other institution in the country. The goal is, when everything is working just as it should be, is the integration of faith and learning. So all of our faith is coming into contact with all of our learning. And even if that's an engineering course or a chemistry course, I'm teaching that in a different way than I would at a secular institution. Now, this is a third point, the investigation of the world from a Christian worldview. We're still learning much of the same content, all of the same content, as I would be learning at another institution. But I'm bringing my faith in and saying, how does my faith inform this content? And what does this content say about my faith? And how do that is happening in every single one of our classrooms, no matter what the subject matters is happening. And then there are like-minded peers and mentors. So this is a part of all of these, right? Because we have like-minded peers and mentors, the culture is affirming. Because we have like-minded peers and mentors, there's the integration of the faith and learning. These are important pieces. When I was at the verse that kept coming back to my mind and that my wife and I kept saying was, I think our kids could get a great education and get amazing jobs after an education like that. But what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Now, let me caveat that to say, not everyone who goes to a secular institution forfeits their soul. Not everyone who goes to a Christian institution does not forfeit their soul. So those are important things, but that's what we kept rolling through our minds as we made this decision. So just some benefits of a Christian education. And these are the main reasons why I believe in it, and I am able to talk to other people about it as they're making this decision. So let's talk about your to-do list. How should you be doing this if you're beginning the college search process? So in your freshman and sophomore year of high school, and I would push this back even middle school, the main goal is exposure, right? The hope is that we're helping our young people say, college is the next step in your education. So whether that's many of us who have done higher education before, some of this is just natural. It's happening already. If you're a first generation parent and you didn't go to college, then some of this is going to have to be more intentional. But beginning the conversation, what are the types of institutions out there? What are the benefits of each? You're attending this kind of a broadcast, and this is a part of that. What are your interests? What do you think you want to do? Who do you want to be when you grow up? Those types of questions are really important. And then getting on college campuses. So these can be really easy. We want you on our campuses, and so there are often free opportunities to do that, whether that's concerts, ball games, camps, events, lots of different things. Coming to NCFCA at Northwestern, doing NCFCA events in your area that may be on a college campus. Those are all great ways to expose your young people to what college is, especially in this freshman, sophomore year. And then beginning to practice that standardized test. If you're a homeschool student, you're probably all of our students now are used to standardized tests, but to see what the PSAT or the pre-ACT or the CLT is a newer test in that standardized college entrance exam. That CLT is a classical learning test. Many of you have probably heard about that. If you haven't, it's definitely something to check out. NCFCA would be very closely aligned with what CLT is doing. CLT is looking to test more of a classically trained student. And so it would probably fit with many of you in how you're testing. And then investigate dual enrollment options. Dual enrollment is taking college level courses while you're in high school. So many high schools are doing that with advanced placement or international baccalaureate, college in the schools. Some high schools are sending students to another college to take advantage of that. But those are very great ways to save money if you can take some college credits while you're in high school. Not everybody does that, and it works out fine, but more and more and more we're seeing students come to college with 5, 10, 30. There's an NCFCA student that came to University of Northwestern, and I think she had almost 90 credits completed by the time she entered as a freshman. So there are lots of different ways. It's a great opportunity to save some money, and it's a way that your student can begin to think more about what college will look like. So that's freshman, sophomore year. Your junior year, the goal is to begin to build your choice set. In other words, what are the schools that I'm going to look at seriously? So we deepen the conversation. What are the types of institutions that you're most interested in? So we've maybe looked at the website of the community college in town. We've maybe looked at the website of a couple Christian colleges. Hey, you did nationals at University of Northwestern. Last year you did nationals at Anderson. Remember those schools? You know, deepening those conversations about what are the types of institutions. Did you like the Christian college more than you liked the community college that we looked at? Some of those conversations. This is the time to begin to start to talk about costs as well. What are the different costs of these institutions? Why do they cost? What do you get for what you pay? And then what are you hoping to study? I am a really big believer in a student not needing to know exactly what they want to study when they come in. Undecided is still the most popular major for college freshmen across the country. Nationally speaking, 50% of students change their major at least once in their college career. So trying to strong arm your 16-year-old into what they're going to study for the next 6 years is a challenge. And oftentimes that student who thinks that they know exactly what they want to study, it feels even more pressure about, can I change my major if I decide that that's not what it is? So that's an important conversation, at least to begin to have, but with lots of freedom in there. And then this is the time that we begin, like I said, to choose the institutions that you're going to investigate more deeply. I really recommend making an official admissions visit during this time. So at least get, and you should visit all the institutions that are in your choice set. Ideally in your junior year. Most of the time, students will do this in fall of their junior year, maybe into the spring of their junior year as well. And then spring of their junior year, most students are taking that standardized test, the ACT, SAT, or CLT. Now, in this crazy turned up, upside down world that we're living in, many institutions are going to what we're calling test optional. And I can talk about that a little bit more in the question and answer time. But primarily what that is some institutions are saying you don't have to have a standardized test to apply for admission to the institution. So that's junior year, a little bit of what we're working on there. And then senior year, usually summer before senior year, is when you want to develop your list of these are the institutions to which I'm going to apply. I've maybe visited some of them, hopefully most of them during my junior year. And now I've decided the ones that I'm going to apply to. And the goal of the senior year is to apply and decide. So complete the conversation. Where are you going to apply? What are your chances of admissions? There are lots of different, there's a large spectrum, like I said, of selectivity. I talked about open enrollment institutions like community and technical colleges. And then there are highly competitive, like the Ivies, who Harvard admits about 6% of its applications. And then there's lots of folks all in between that range. What are the final costs? What can you afford? By this time, hopefully you've had some cost conversations and you've said, this is what our expectation for you to pay is. This is what our expectation for us to pay is. This is what student loans are. Are you comfortable with student loans? what's the payoff for student loans, all of those types of things. And then which one have you/we chosen? That's the goal of this time. You want to visit again. I think summer before senior year and especially fall before senior year, you're definitely going to visit those institutions that you've applied to. Or maybe some students I've heard this past year, as we were talking a lot about this, students were saying, I'm waiting to be admitted to those institutions and then going to make some final visits so that I can decide. So that's happening November, December, January kind of timeframe. Now, depending on where you're looking, college campus looks a lot different in Minnesota in January than it does in October. So different times to figure out those visits. I always say build a relationship with your admissions counselor, no matter what, especially if you're applying to an institution that is a competitive admission. It's really important. But that admissions counselor, there are folks like me at every single institution throughout the country that want to help you through this process. And if you have a relationship with those folks, it's going to be significantly easier to get that help, for them to understand you and know your situation and be able to assist you and your family or you and your student along that process. And then this is the time where we complete the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And the FAFSA is how you receive aid from the federal government, usually your state government, and from the institution. Most institutions will require a FAFSA for you to receive almost any aid. Not always. Some institutions will give you some institutional aid even without a FAFSA, but they're going to want to see a FAFSA for lots of different scholarships and things like that. So we're also applying for scholarships during senior year too. One quick story, I was at an event like this at my church, and there was an admissions counselor, and he told the story of this young woman who told her parents she wasn't going to work the summer before her senior year, and her parents were really worked up, and she said, well, I'm just going to spend all my time applying for scholarships. Her parents were like, oh no, this is thousands of dollars that you're potentially leaving on the table by not working over the summer. Anyway, she spent all of her time writing scholarship essays, applying to outside scholarships, and she won $21,000 in outside scholarship money. And the gentleman said her largest scholarship was $5,000. So there were lots of small scholarships that she applied for and won. Now, that's not everybody's experience, but there is outside money for students to apply for. And those are places, a good Google search will direct you to a lot of those. Fastwebs.com is a scholarship clearinghouse website, but there are lots of scholarship clearinghouse websites that will help you with some of that stuff. Also in your senior year, the question is, do I retake my standardized test? Most for the ACT, we'll talk about ACT because that's the language that I speak most often, but ACT students that retake it, 50% of them go up 2 points. 25% go down and 25% stay the same. So often it makes sense to retake that standardized test at least once. And then once we have our financial aid awards from the institutions that we're applying to, then we can really compare true costs. So like I said, we might have a sticker price from one institution that's $50,000 or $40,000. And then we have a sticker price from another institution, maybe a state institution, that's $23,000. Well, those seem really different, but once aid is involved, those are going to look maybe more similar. So that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that we're comparing aid packages and true costs as much as we can. And know that usually private institutions have more dollars to give away than state institutions. And so those costs are going to get a little bit closer. And then decide and confirm your enrollment by May 1st. Now this year, May 1st is somewhat of an artificial deadline for many of us. We have moved our deadline back to June 1st, but most of the time, May 1st is that college decision day. So that's just a little bit about the college search process, your to-do list. I'm happy to share these slides with Natalia because hopefully you weren't all feverishly taking notes, and Natalia can make these available as is helpful to you. Final thoughts. This is an important decision, but it's predictive, not determinative. So let me talk about two ways that that's true. It's predictive in a faith way. A student might choose a Christian education because they say, I really don't want my student to go off the rails and find some other faith or skip their faith altogether. That very well may be, and more students do that at a secular institution than do that at a faith-based institution, at a Christian institution. But it's predictive. There are students that go to secular institutions and deepen their faith through groups like FCA and InterVarsity and their local church. And then there are students that come to Christian colleges and say, I never really bought this anyway. But those are both outliers on those scales. So it's predictive, not determinative. The same is the case in the job market. I read a great Wall Street Journal article that talked about this next point, is that it's much more about the student than it is about the institution. So there are students that go to less prestigious institutions that do amazing work and go out and make a difference in the world and find jobs that support their families and all of that, right? There are lots and lots of those stories. And then there are students that go to very prestigious institutions and they don't do well, and they go out and it doesn't have the same effect as that they had hoped when they went to that institution. So it's predictive, not determinative. The other thing that I would say is this is a decision like all decisions that really need to be bathed in prayer. And that's what we do. We're constantly praying for our students and their families as they're trying to make this decision, and really hoping that we can help them in that process. So just some thoughts about what it looks like to do this whole college search, the different types of institutions, the benefits of a Christian higher education. We talked a little bit about your to-do list, your family's to-do in your 4 years of high school, and then just some final thoughts. Again, God bless you as you go through this college search process. Not only are you doing this, but some of you are doing this in the midst of this COVID-19. So we are at Northwestern praying for our students even more during this time than ever. Well, thank you. That's my content. Now, some time for questions. And this is my contact information. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have even after this. My email address is there, and then that's our admissions email address. If you have specific questions for me, please feel free to reach out to me. If you have general questions about University of Northwestern, we'd love to get in touch with you.
Thank you, Andy. And we have a great lineup of questions, so we'll dive right in. But before we hit all of those, I wanted to take a moment. Could you tell our families and our students about the discounts that are available through the University of Northwestern? Because I know we have a couple of students who are interested in attending. Great.
So we have two main scholars. There's one main scholarship for students at the University of Northwestern. Do you still have my screen, Natalia?
Yes.
Great. So all students that are affiliated with Northwestern at all get a $2,500 scholarship over 4 years. So on our application, we ask, have you participated in NCFCA? Because we value the NCFCA relationship so much, all students that participate get $2,500. And then for students that there's a discount for affiliates, and that would be parents, family members, for our dual enrollment, and participants for our dual enrollment, graduate and adult undergraduate studies. So that's a 20% discount. So 20% discount for one class or for your whole degree for dual enrollment, adult undergraduate. So if you need to complete a degree, or you want to do that as an adult, or if you want to go on and do graduate studies with us, there's a 20% discount for that.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to answer those questions. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe with the hard ones on the top.
Okay, well, we're going to walk through these chronologically, much in the way that you gave your presentation.
Great.
So we have a few questions first about planning. One parent gives a little bit of a preface of where they're at. Their son is in 8th grade. And so they're asking, as they plot his high school career, can you help them understand what looks best on a transcript? And there are a couple of options listed there. So dual enrollment versus CLEP versus AP, and many other options.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I always tell students is what looks best on your transcript is the best grades in the most challenging coursework. So if you're going to get the best grades in an AP course, then take that AP course, right? If you're going to get the best grade in general math, take general math. So that's something to think about. There are different things to think about too as you're thinking about dual enrollment, earning college credit while you're in high school. AP, for instance, and IB, you do for the most part, a semester-long course, and then whether you earn that college credit is based on one day, one test. Mm-hmm. So for some students, they like that because the pressure is fairly low, right? They may do really great in the class, take the test, not do as well. Well, no problem. They just didn't earn that college credit. If you're doing a dual enrollment course where you're actually taking a college credit course while you're in high school, the pressure is a little bit higher because you're actually building a college transcript at that point. So you're taking a college course. So when you go to the institution, they will want to, whatever institution you go to, they will want to see that course. And you're building oftentimes a GPA as well. So if you fail that course, it's significant, or don't do as well in that course, it's significantly, that then is on your transcript for the rest of your college journey. So what looks the best is courses that you've done excellently with.
That's helpful. Piggybacking off of that question, what should homeschool students focus on during junior high and high school? Academics, church involvement, volunteer work, employment, special interests, robotics, STEM, journalism. I'm sure we could go on for 20 minutes with all of the options.
So let me say a couple things. Again, it really depends on where you want to end up, right? So if a student wants to end up at a highly competitive institution, then that path is significantly more important. And what I would say is the most important thing along that path, if you're looking at highly competitive institutions, is academics. So when I was at the University of Minnesota, the average ACT score there was 28. So it was more of a competitive institution. And the things that they looked at first were the standardized tests and the GPA, and then the coursework that a student took. So those academic things, I would say, are primary. Now, if you're looking to be at a less competitive institution, and that is, to be honest, the vast majority of institutions in the country would be considered less competitive admission institutions, then I would say, and I would say this anyway, be a well-rounded individual, right? That's going to be what's going to serve your student best in the long run. But if you're looking at, one of the military academies or an Ivy League school or some of the, the University of Minnesota or University of Michigan, for instance, I grew up in Michigan, their average ACT is 30. So it just depends on where you want to end up. But I would say for the most part, the goal is to educate well-rounded young people who love Jesus. And so, the goal is not, one of my favorite homeschooling mentors said, we're raising adults, we're not raising kids. And I love that, right? Because that helps me have the longer view for my kids. I'm not raising a college student. I'm raising somebody who hopefully for the long run is a saint. And if I keep that in mind, then my decisions are going to be based on that.
Yeah. Excellent. Next question has to do with in-state versus out-of-state. What are some important things to consider when choosing between in-state or out-of-state tuitions? How do you narrow down your options?
That's a great question. And it oftentimes, some of these real specific ones are really great to talk to an institution about, but in-state versus out-of-state tuition, the first thing to know is only state-funded institutions have in-state and out-of-state tuition. So private institutions usually only have one tuition rate. And there are some even flagship institutions that will only have, or state institutions that will only have one tuition rate. But usually state-funded institutions have a lower rate for in-state students and a higher rate for out-of-state students because it's funded by the state, right? So if you're a Texas resident, you should, and you're already paying money towards Texas institutions, you should have a better deal than the folks from Michigan that are trying, or Minnesota that are trying to get into UT Austin or something like that. So that's what in-state, out-of-state tuition is. Always ask. There are institutions that will give you in-state tuition if they want you. So if your student has performed really well academically, there are lots of institutions that will give you in-state tuition. The other thing to know about in-state and out-of-state is it's often cheaper to go in-state. And one of the reasons for that is most states grant state grant money. So grants are money from the government that you don't have to pay back. And most states have a state grant program, but you have to stay in state to get that money. So, and that's often for folks that are getting grant money, federal Pell Grant or state grant. But if you stay in state, you keep that money. If you go out of state, you lose that money. Now, some folks are like, well, we're not getting that money anyway, so let's go out of state. Or some out of state institutions will try and backfill that state grant money for you. So they'll give out of state students a little bit more money, understanding that they're not going to get that out in-state money. So again, fill out the FAFSA, make sure that you are comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, helpful to know all the options. We're going to move on to testing questions. And I'm sure this is a little bit of a trick question, but I'll throw it at you. I'm confident that you can handle it. Which test is best to take? ACT versus SAT versus CLT?
Yeah, it is a good question. And what I would say is traditionally the way it's been is ACT is the middle of the country. So ACT is the Midwest and the South. SAT has traditionally been seen on the coast. So West Coast, East Coast. The other answer is some students will take both because they are different tests. They test different things. And so some students will take the ACT and the SAT. Oftentimes we're talking about thousands of dollars of scholarship based on these tests. And so taking it and retaking it makes some sense. CLT, like I said, is a new player. They're only a few years old, and primarily it's private institutions that are taking CLT. So what I would say is the correct answer to that question is whatever your institution that you want to go to tells you. There will be, most of us take ACT and SAT. Now, there are some institutions that just take SAT, and those are usually on either coast, but and there are some that prefer one or the other. But again, whatever you're going to do the best in. So it may be that you take one or multiple of those.
That's great. Along those lines, we have another question about ACT, SAT. Do test scores of those two tests taken before high school count?
Usually an SAT or ACT score is good for 3 years. And so it would depend on when you're entering college. So, but usually 3 years is the length of how long those are usable.
Okay. Now you mentioned something in your presentation that I'm sure piqued interest. Can you explain the benefits and detriments of test optional?
Yeah.
What areas will colleges prioritize then for admission with this option, particularly for homeschool students?
Yeah, so what I will tell you is this is a new world and is changing almost every day because of the COVID-19 stuff. And let me explain just real briefly why that is. So most juniors take a standardized test, ACT or SAT, in the spring of their junior year. Well, all those tests have been canceled. Well, so we were going to hopefully get those test scores over the summer. All those testing dates have been canceled. So now what will happen is we will open up applications this summer for fall 21 students, and we will not have the option of most of them having a standardized test. So just for the pragmatic reason, many, many institutions are moving in that direction, saying they're going to be test optional. Some of them have done it long before this based on philosophical reasons. There's some talk about different groups of students not performing as well as other groups of students on the ACT or on standardized tests. And so using that is maybe benefiting one group over another group of students. But what I would say is when a student doesn't have a standardized test, the main thing that we're going to look at is GPA. And GPA really is a good predictor of success. So a student that has not performed well in high school is going to have to make some big changes in order to perform well in college, right? So GPA really is a pretty good predictor of success in college. And so that's what we will rely on. For selective institutions, they're going to be looking at the whole application, right? So it's going to be the college essay, all of those extracurriculars. But academics are still going to be the top thing that folks are going to look at. And if you're a homeschool student, in most cases, they're still going to want a transcript, and they're still going to want a GPA based on a 4-point scale. So you'll have to figure that out with the institution that you're applying to. Different institutions do. Let me say just briefly about homeschool. Different institutions deal with homeschool students more. I think 19% of our total institution last year was homeschool students.
Wow.
So we have a large homeschool student population. So we deal with that. In every state, as you homeschoolers know, deals with homeschooling differently. So it's going to affect different things. It's going to affect even what I would say too is as a homeschool parent, I told my wife, let's just look at what the colleges want and aim for that. And what does the college that we want to send our kids to, what do they require for admission? And let's aim towards that. So that's a really helpful thing. And we all publish that, what we want from our students for admission. You know, do we want 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 2 years of foreign language in high school? So those are helpful things, I think, too, to think through if you're a homeschool family.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I think that last part of what you said begins to answer this question, but I'll give you an opportunity if you want to add anything to what you just mentioned. A parent says, one of the reasons we chose to homeschool was to avoid teaching to the test, yet the great emphasis on test scores in the admission and scholarship process from universities and college is apparent. So do you see any change happening there or any encouragement for that transition?
Yeah, so what I would say is, I don't know that I would teach towards the ACT or SAT. That's not really how those tests work. They don't publish content, for instance, that you would be needing to teach towards, in other words. It really is a measure of what you've learned. Now, are there things that you would probably want to cover for your student to do well on the ACT or SAT? Yes, but in a lot of ways, those are probably things that you will have covered anyway if you've gotten to a certain thing in high school. Now, if you're a homeschool parent, and I know there's a large spectrum of us too, who's saying, I'm just hoping that my students learn what they're interested in. Well, then the standardized test is going to be a challenge. But formal education in college may be a challenge as well, because there's a core curriculum at every institution where we're going to say, no, we want you to have some math. We want you to have some science. We want you to have English. We want you to have these different types of courses as well, whether you're interested in those or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would say teach towards the ACT or SAT. It's not really how those tests work.
Yeah, very helpful. Well, I will say there are several questions on testing, but I'm going to move on to funding questions and encourage those who still had testing questions to reach out to Andy and continue the conversation.
And I would say too, reach out if University of Northwestern, I'm more than happy to answer questions. If University of Northwestern is not the place that you think you're going to end up, these are, testing questions are great and really good for specific institutions, because I'm going to answer a testing question very differently than Harvard or Yale is going to answer a testing question, then is the community college down the street, then is the regional university in your town going to answer that. So it is helpful to, where am I thinking? And let's ask those testing questions of that institution.
Yeah, that's good advice. I guess we'll grab one last one, because there are a couple that just came in and they're all along the same lines here.
Yeah.
How do colleges, you touched on how colleges are becoming more accustomed to working with homeschool students, and each university is going to be different. Mm-hmm. But in light of some of the test optional movements that we're seeing, what do you think the impacts may be for homeschool students? I know one parent said their experience was that some of the universities they've worked with minimized GPA if the parent was the one who was assigning that GPA from the homeschool years.
Yeah, and I think we certainly understand that, right? And that's why for many of us, the standardized test was an important criteria, because if a student has a 4.0 GPA and then they get a 16 on the ACT, then we're saying, ooh, gosh, okay, maybe we need to do something for this student to help them transition, right? Mm-hmm. So, but we're going to have less of that. We're just going to have less of that as we move towards test optional. And so I don't know that we'll say, oh, you're a homeschool student, so I'm going to not trust your 4.0 GPA, because I think those are still exceptions. Those students that have 4.0 GPAs and then do terribly on the standardized test, those are exceptional cases. On the whole, homeschool students perform significantly better than other students nationally. So a homeschool student would be exceptional if they weren't like that. So that's what I would say. But again, a wonderful conversation to have with the institution that you want to apply to. And what I would say is, many folks think this institution is really a selective institution when maybe it's not, right? So don't not apply to an institution just because you're a homeschool student and you think, oh, my mom gave me a 3.8 GPA and I'm not sure that that's going to amount to what I want it to be.
Good advice. Okay, funding. We really are moving that direction. How early do you start the financial aid process, and what does that process look like if you could do a broad sweep?
Sure. So it's done in the senior year, and usually it's October of your senior year, they release the FAFSA for the upcoming year. So that's when you want to fill out the FAFSA as soon as you can. And they use, so forgive some of this, I'll throw all this terminology out and I'll try and explain as best I can. They use your prior year taxes So they go back and use 2 years ago taxes so that you can fill it out in October, because obviously you don't have your taxes completed for this year. So that would be the prior year. They use prior, we call it, and it's 2 years ago taxes. And so if you were filling out the 21 FAFSA, the fall 20 FAFSA, let's just pretend, you would use your 2018 taxes to complete that. And the FAFSA is just questions based on your family's household income. So it's asking questions about your taxes, how many people are in your family, retirement, no, not retirement funds, and savings. So it's your income and savings primarily, those two things. And then your students' income and savings as well. So there are some institutions that will ask additional questions on top of the FAFSA. So they may ask questions about your the money that you have in your home, and they may ask questions about other income streams as well. So, but the FAFSA just asks questions about your income and savings. And there's a certain amount of savings that you can have before it's counted against you on the FAFSA. And then what they figure out is what your estimated family contribution should be. So I always talk about it like this: if you make $1 million in a year, they figure you should be able to cover all of your education, all of your students' education. So your estimated family contribution will be high. Your EFC will be high. If you make $1 in a year, your EFC will be 0. Your estimated family contribution will be 0. In other words, they think you cannot cover any of your education. So then they do a figure where you say, I'm going to take the cost of my education for 1 year minus the estimated family contribution. So the cost of education minus what you should pay, and then the bottom line is need. And then they make up need in grants, loans, and work study. So those are the 3 main types of scholarships that the government thinks about, or types of funding that the government thinks about, loans and work study.
Perfect. A more specific question related to FAFSA. One parent asked, if we submitted our FAFSA and then experienced a significant change in income due to COVID, is it possible to update or resubmit to secure additional funding?
It's a great question. And just so you know, COVID is not the only time that you would do this. So there are actually lots of times that you would appeal your FAFSA, appeal your EFC. And most of the time you do this with an institution. So you approach the institution and you would say, I need to fill out some sort of appeal form about financial aid and you don't do this because I don't like the number that you gave me. You do this because something from your FAFSA has changed. So someone has died. So when I filled out the FAFSA, we had 2 incomes, and now my spouse has died, so I only have 1 income. Or there's been a divorce, or someone has lost their job, or like you said, COVID-19 has come along. So we're getting lots of appeals right now, and we can handle those, right? We know how to do that. So by all means, once you filled out the FAFSA, it's just a snapshot, right? It's a snapshot of the moment that you filled out the FAFSA. Now, lots of things may change after you filled out the FAFSA. And if those changes negatively affect your estimated family contribution, then you definitely want to approach the institution and say, I need to change my FAFSA and fill out an appeal.
Mm-hmm.
Financial aid people are some of the nicest people, but they really are often great because they're tunnel vision type people. They just deal with numbers and financial aid every single day. And so that conversation can often start in the admissions office. Start with the admissions office and we'll help you through that, but we'll involve the financial aid people as quickly as you need us to.
That's great. Another question related to funding. where should students go for financing? Can you point them in the right direction? Are there some types of financing that are better than others?
Okay, so do you think they're asking about loans, like private loans?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the best loans are federal loans. The best loans are loans that are guaranteed by the federal government. So not everybody is eligible for federal loans, but there are two types of federal loans. There are subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized loans are for lower income people and families, and they do not accrue interest until a student stops going to college. Unsubsidized loans start accruing interest right away. Now, a student doesn't have to pay on their loans until they stop going to college. Well, I always say stop going to college, because if you go for a semester and you stop, 6 months later, you're going to have to start paying on those loans. Or if you go to college for 10 years and you become a doctor, you don't have to start paying on those loans until you stop going to college. Now, again, unsubsidized loans start accruing interest, so many folks will start paying on those loans as quickly as they can. So the federal government is the best place to go for financing. Private financing, some folks will choose to do that, and I would say there are lots of different places. I'd start with my local spots and then go from there.
Okay, this is a unique question. Someone wants to know, have you ever seen a college bring their price down if presented with a competing college's price?
Yeah, for sure. So that happens actually fairly often. So that's those apples to apples that you want to compare. So you submit the FAFSA in October. Usually by January, you have all of your awards. And then you really can. And so what I would say is we don't do that for folks that are trying to play the system, right? We do that for a student who comes to us and says, I really want to go to University of Northwestern, but I have this other offer from X institution that is less than yours. And sometimes we might say, oh, well, that's from a regional state university. There's no way we're ever going to get down to that number. But what if we gave you an extra $1,000? Would that help? An extra $2,000, depending on if we really want you or not, right? So that's how that gets in there too. But for sure, and again, some of that is developing that relationship with your admissions office to say, hey, this is what is going on. And some of it is, well, I've never had a conversation with you before, so I don't know if you really want to come to my institution, and it seems like you're just trying to pit me against this other institution that you really do want to go to. We're probably not going to have that conversation. So it's an important part of that. What I tell my people is I want to win on value and help on price. So we understand that a Christian higher education is expensive. So we want to win on value. And then I want to do my best to help on price. Yeah. We're not going to win on price.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful to know when comparing different institutions.
Yep.
Okay, one last question, and then we will wrap up the question and answer time. This is specific to some of the changes that we're experiencing currently, the unknown that we're looking forward to. How ready are colleges to offer online alternatives? And could you even give a little insight into some of the plans that you're seeing from your vantage point are being made in the event that students can't be on campus?
Well, let me say this. Institutions are planning to be on campus this fall. So there are very few institutions that have come out and said, we're going to be online. So institutions are planning to be on campus this fall. But all of us are also making contingencies in case we are not allowed to be on campus this fall. Every institution wants a student who wants to be on campus to be on campus. That is across the country. We do not want to sell a student, here, you're going to be on campus, and then, oops, actually, we're going to be online. So that is not what any of us want to do. We all want to give the students what they want. Now, some students choose online education, and that's a totally different thing. And that's a really valid thing in lots of places. But we want to give students the education that they want, and hopefully that's on campus. But all of us are building contingencies to still have that, all of the things that I talked about, the benefits of a Christian education happening online. And my son is finishing up his senior year doing dual enrollment through Northwestern, and he's doing that online, and he's finishing up, and all of us are, right? Finishing up college credits right now online. And I think that we're doing that as best we can. We're doing that in a way that is hopefully just as beneficial, integrating that faith in the learning just as much as we were in the classroom, but really working to that end. But our main goal is to be on campus this fall.
Amen to that. We will all pray in that direction. Well, thank you, Andy. I know that this presentation was really helpful based on the questions that came in.
Natalia, would it be okay if I prayed for
yes
students and families before we go? One of the things that I really love to do is to do that, because none of us has the wisdom that we need for this college search process. So let me real quick. Our Father in heaven, I pray for the students and families that are here tonight, and all of the NCFCA students and families as they enter this college search process. You've told us for those of us who lack wisdom, we should ask. And so we ask for wisdom. Lord, I pray for parents and families that you would give them wisdom as they help their students in this college search process. And it would all be for your honor and for your glory, so that we might all become more and more into the likeness of your Son, Jesus. We pray this in his name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Andy. I know
thank you.
The NCFCA team is grateful for all of the ways that the University of Northwestern continues to partner with us to serve our families and our students. And I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to pour into our families.
Well, it wasn't hard. Actually, I'm home most of the time right now, so happy to do it.
That is true. Very good. Well, families and students, I'm going to give you a brief preview of our upcoming events for the next couple of weeks. So if you're interested in jotting down some notes, I know if you're like me, your calendar is emptier than usual, but it seems like things are constantly changing, so always helpful to have a good reminder. This Thursday, May 7th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, our NCFCA Book Club will be meeting for the second live session with author Jeff Baldwin. He's going to be walking us through a discussion on the book, The Deadliest Monster, which provides an introduction to worldviews. Join us. It's going to be a lot of fun, very interactive. If you were there the first session, you walked away with a great reading list and lots of food for thought. On Monday, May 11th at 3:30 p.m. Central, and Thursday, May 14th at 3:30 p.m. Central, our club leaders virtual coffee will be taking place. Our May sessions on those two dates are going to be on the topic engaging students through a virtual learning community. So like Andy mentioned, we're all praying and hoping for meetings in person soon. But in the meantime, we are going to be innovative and we'll navigate how to engage students in a virtual learning community. So if you are a club leader, if you're in leadership at your club, and you want firsthand experience and some tips, we'll have a guest speaker who is going to walk us through some great ways to engage an audience online. This week of May 4th, we will be releasing our debate resolutions. So we can do a little bit of a silent drum roll in anticipation. Watch your inbox for additional notes on when and how that will be taking place, but the votes are in, you have decided, and we are excited to roll those selections out to you so you can begin preparing for this next year. Mid-May event rules will be released, as we have mentioned before. And then final note, don't miss July 27th through the 31st. Our summit workshop is going to be a free event designed to help students build a strong foundation in communication skills, and we'll be tackling the NCFCA resolutions. So that's why we'll be announcing very shortly, so you can look forward to that. The following week, August 3rd through the 7th, The Summit Intensive is going to be our new event. It is going to be a paid event designed to help motivated students take the next steps in preparing the competition season. So week 1 is going to lay the foundation. We'll start to tackle the resolution. Week 2 is going to be very hands-on, practical application. The details are coming and will be available next week. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you again. Thank you, Andy. We're grateful for you and for the University of Northwestern. And until the next session, we love you all, NCSCA family, and look forward to the day when we can see you in person again soon. Have a good night.